Battle through the heavens, Grand World. Chapter 26. Difficulty. The cave looked small from the outside, but it was very big inside. It was pitch black in front of them. The cave was about 30 to 40 feet tall, enough for 3 people to walk side by side. Xiao Yan vigilantly looked around. With the help of the light from the glazed monarch flame, he touched the mountain wall and slowly walked forward. Gradually, Xiao Yan felt a heat coming from both sides of the mountain wall. He felt some heat when he touched it. At the same time, dots of red light appeared in the tunnel ahead. Xiao Yi was delighted. He couldn't help but increase his pace. However, the glazed monarch flame that was protecting his body did not weaken in the slightest. When Xiao Yan finally arrived at the place where the light came from, he could not help but take a deep breath. From here on out, the mountain walls on both sides of the mountain were filled with scarlet red crystals. They were perfectly embedded in the cracks of the stone, and he carefully felt the energy contained within these red stones. Xiao Yan couldn't help but be shocked. The fire element energy contained within them was almost twice as much as the energy in the heavenly beast cavern outside. It was truly abnormal. There were so many energy contained within the red stones that could be seen everywhere. Xiao Yan sighed in his heart. He looked at the stones and thought for a moment, but still did not take them. Since these things were everywhere, then they weren't real treasures. Time was of the essence, and with the storage ring, they wouldn't be able to store a lot of things. Xiao Yan immediately rushed forward. As these red stones had an extremely majestic fire attribute energy, the surface of the stones also emitted a faint fiery light. The fiery light emitted by the tens of thousands of stones also lit up the cave as if it was daytime. As he advanced forward, Xiao Yan vaguely felt that the glazed monarch flame in his body seemed to have a restless feeling. He suppressed the excitement in his heart. Xiao Yan held onto the mountain wall and carefully walked inside. The further he went, the more excited he became. The red stone wall became more and more complete. When he first entered, it was only the size of a fist. Now the size of the stone could almost be compared to a millstone, and the fire element energy on the stone also increased drastically. After a short while, Xiao Yan felt an inexplicable heat coming from within his body. His face was gradually covered in sweat, and his skin was faintly red. He wiped his sweat. Xiao Yan looked at the ground. Some of the ordinary stones on the ground could no longer withstand the intense heat and turned into lava that covered the ground. Even with the protection of the glazed monarch flame, Xiao Yan still felt as if he was in a furnace. When he saw the ground made of lava, he took a deep breath of the hot air. Good heavens, such a high temperature, I reckon even ordinary emperors would not be able to withstand it. Rubbing his eyes that were somewhat sore due to the sweat entering his eyes, Xiao Yan endured the high temperature and continued forward for another 10 minutes. When he turned a corner, a hole the size of a house suddenly appeared in front of him. Before Xiao Yan could rejoice, a black shadow flashed in front of him, and then a ball of hot flame shot towards him. Xiao Yan was shocked, and he didn't have time to dodge. His right fist, which was wrapped by the glazed monarch flame, suddenly punched out, and collided with the rapidly approaching flame. Oh! With a muffled groan, Xiao Yan could not help but take 2 or 3 steps back. His chest, which was already stuffy due to the heat, felt even more uncomfortable. When he was retreating, Xiao Yan finally saw the attacker's appearance clearly. It was a very small red wolf. Its body was covered in flames, and its eyes were staring at Xiao Yan with endless ferocity. There's actually another one. Xiao Yan saw the small red wolf moaning helplessly. He heard the low growls coming from the latter's throat. Clearly, there was a strong threat. With a low growl, the little crimson fire flame wolf suddenly pounced towards Xiao Yan. Its big mouth was full of sharp teeth. Sensing that the latter's ki was much stronger than Man Li's after consuming the blood barbaric pill, Xiao Yan could only temporarily avoid the attack. The glass-like monarch flames on his body covered his entire body tightly. A few afterimages flashed under Xiao Yan's feet, and he dodged the moment the small crimson fire flame wolf pounced towards him. When he appeared a few meters behind the little wolf, Xiao Yan secretly exhaled. He didn't expect that the 3000 lightning movement would have some effect in the great world. Xiao Yan dodged the fierce attack. The little wolf roared angrily, and the flame that was flowing around its body seemed to have become bigger. Turning around, the little wolf stared at Xiao Yan with its red eyes. Slowly, it walked towards the ladder. Behind him was the hole in the cave and there was no way back. Seeing the little wolf walking towards him with red eyes, Xiaoyan's heart skipped a beat. His already hot heart became even more impatient, and sweat began to flow down his forehead. Before he fell to the ground, he was vaporized by the high temperature. The little wolf slowly pressed forward. Xiaoyan also slowly retreated until he entered the cave. Only when his retreating steps were blocked by the wall did he stop. As soon as his back touched the wall, the high temperature instantly burned his clothes into ashes. Xiaoyan couldn't help but let out a low cry of pain. A heart-piercing pain came from his back. He forcefully endured the pain and opened his sore eyes. Xiaoyan stared at the little crimson fire flame wolf, which was about to pounce on him, and took a deep breath of the hot air. He stretched out his palm, and a crimson gold flame turned into a Xiaoyi, appearing in his palm. Xiaoyan could not help but smile bitterly when he sensed that the Xiaoyan's qi in his body had been consumed due to the high temperature. This was going to be a huge problem. He might really die here today. The small crimson fire flame wolf roared in a low voice. The red wolf fur on its body stood up. Sparks as thin as silver needles shot towards Xiaoyan like locusts. Xiaoyan's expression changed slightly, and he didn't dare to remove the glazed monarch flame that was protecting his body. He could only let the Xiaoyi turn into a wall of fire to block the attack. At the same time, the remaining origin monarch qi in his body started circulating rapidly. He kept looking around, trying to get out. When his eyes fell on the 8 pillars of fire that were about 2 meters tall standing in the middle. The fire in Xiaoyan's eyes flashed. This should be the treasure that the middle-aged man had mentioned. However, he didn't have the time to collect the 8 fire pillars. Escaping was the most important thing. Dense sparks kept hitting the wall of fire, causing the wall of fire formed by the Xiaoyi to tremble violently and wail. After the wall of fire persisted for a moment, a soft sound was heard. After which, the Xiaoyi revealed its original form and cried out in pain before stumbling into Xiaoyan's arms. Without the wall of fire blocking it, the remaining fire needles shot towards Xiaoyan. Xiaoyan did not have time to care about the Xiaoyi's injuries. He suddenly punched out with his right fist. The aura that it carried turned into a huge black fist that smashed towards the rapidly approaching fire needles. Bang! A heavy sound was heard. The huge black fist and the remaining fire needles held each other for a moment. As the color of the huge black fist faded, a large number of fire needles also disappeared. When the huge black fist was completely destroyed, Xiaoyan felt as if he had suffered a heavy blow. He violently crashed into the wall, and couldn't help but spit out a mouthful of blood. When the small crimson fire flame wolf saw this, a trace of human-like joy flashed across its eyes. It suddenly pounced towards Xiaoyan. When the Xiaoyi in Xiaoyan's arms saw the blood that Xiaoyan spat out, it immediately let out a furious squeaking sound. Its aura completely erupted, and almost at the same time, the temperature in the cave also rose rapidly. The moment the temperature in the cave rose, Xiaoyan lost consciousness as if he had been struck by lightning. He fell straight down, and the small crimson fire flame wolf that was about to pounce on Xiaoyan suddenly let out a painful roar. The wolf fur all over his body began to burn, and before the crimson fire flame wolf could fall to the ground, the former was only left with a skeleton. The moment the wolf-shaped skeleton fell to the ground, it was burned to ashes by the extremely high temperature. Only a spirit core that was glowing with red light fell to the ground. The weak red light on the spirit core appeared extremely dim in the burning red cave. Although Xiaoyan was not burned into nothingness under the protection of the glazed monarch flame, his black hair that was originally draped over his shoulders was instantly burned into powder. He became a bald man with a red head. The 8 pillars of fire in the cave were also corroded by the high temperature, melting down to only a meter or so. Inside each pillar of fire, there was a drop of red blood flowing slowly. Under the high temperature, the blood became much redder. What was even stranger was that outside the cave, there were no signs of melting on the wall. It was only a step away. It was as if they were in 2 different spaces. Soon, Xiaoyan, who was lying on the ground, had the protection of the glazed monarch flame. A layer of red color gradually appeared on his skin, and then bubbles of different sizes began to appear. The bubbles burst open, and blood gushed out. Just as Xiaoyan was about to become a bloody person, the Xiaoyi, who was shocked by the crimson fire flame wolf being burned into ashes, suddenly looked in the direction of the 8 pillars of fire. Its pair of golden eyes were filled with shock. A moment later, as if it had been summoned, the Xiaoyi's eyes gradually became confused. It turned into a flame and entered Xiaoyan's body. Xiaoyan, who had fainted on the ground, slowly opened his eyes after the Xiaoyi entered his body. The temperature around his body was no longer as hot as before. He licked his dry lips. Xiaoyan trembled as he stood up. The blood on his body had already condensed into a blood armor. His body moved slightly and fell off his body. His eyes were lifeless as he walked towards the direction of the 8 pillars of fire, as if he was being controlled by someone. Xiaoyan waved his hand and threw out a crimson gold flame. The flame entered the middle of the 8 pillars of fire and instantly disappeared. The next moment, the 8 fire pillars suddenly started spinning rapidly. A cave that could only fit one person appeared out of thin air. Without any hesitation, Xiaoyi flashed in front of Xiaoyan's eyes. He then lifted his leg and walked in. After entering, the cave slowly disappeared. The heat in the cave also quickly faded and returned to normal temperature. Within a few breaths, the huge cave returned to normal. It was as if nothing had happened except for the melting of a lot of stone walls and the increased lava on the ground. As well as the red spirit cores that fell from the center of the cave, they were silently recounting the strange scene just now. This was a world of lava. Crimson red lava gurgled and flowed wherever one's eyes looked. 1,000 feet tall mountain of lava stood towering in the distance. A magma waterfall surged down from the top of the mountain, and it carried an unparalleled impact force as it flowed down 1,000 feet. Hot steam was floating in the air above the magma lake not far away. Huge red bubbles were bubbling up from the lake, and then the bubbles exploded, shooting out magma that was several zhong tall. Xiaoyan, who had regained his senses, stared at the strange scene in front of him with his mouth wide open. He couldn't help but take a deep breath. He swallowed a mouthful of saliva in disbelief. Xiaoyan looked at the sky above him. The sky was also scarlet red, and it was extremely deep. The dark red clouds seemed to weigh thousands of kilograms, and they covered the entire sky. Occasionally, there was a sound of magma that could shake one's heart. Wow! What is this place? Chapter end.